Institute for Behavioral Health Solutions, formerly the California Institute for Mental Health. Thanks for joining us for this webinar on recruiting and hiring foreign physicians. Jeff Leibl from Leibl and Kirkwood is going to start presenting in just a few minutes, but wanted to give you a few housekeeping notes. One thing is that you are all muted right now. If you have questions, please type them into the question box that you should see on the panel to your right. You can also click on the hand icon next to your name, and that will alert us that you would like to ask a question by phone, and we'll unmute you and let you ask the question. Jeff prefers that questions be asked throughout the presentation, so feel free to write questions as we go along. Otherwise, this presentation is being recorded, and we should be able to have it up on our website within a couple of days in case you want to see it again or share it with other people. And yesterday I sent everyone the PowerPoint, but if you didn't receive it, send me an email and I'll get it to you. So, all right. So with that, I'm Jeff. Yes. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Shoshana. Adrian, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. My name is Jeff Leibl, and as Shoshana was saying, please ask questions throughout. I'm going to go through the process of explaining how to deal with foreign physicians and how they can help you, and how you can bring them in to help serve a need in your community. This is the first time I've hosted a webinar. I'm somewhat technically challenged here, so if there's any issues with the way I move the slides around or something, I apologize. This is my first time, so bear with me. But please ask a lot of questions, and if you aren't able to get your question out today, or if I'm not able to answer it, I encourage all of you, if there's questions, to contact me, either email me or phone me. Gladly do that for you. And if you have a physician you're really interested in, it's probably best to set up a call where the three of us get on the line together and really go over that specific physician's options. Because what I'm going to deal with here today is a general overview of how to deal with foreign physicians and how they can possibly come work for you. But every situation is different. So the best thing to do is, when you have somebody before you get too deep into the recruitment process, let's set up a call. Let's go over the process, either between the two of us or the physician as well, to see if there's a good option. So with that said, I love questions, so ask a lot of questions. Now, I've been doing this for almost 25 years now. I'm from Canada, immigrated to the United States in 1990. My business partner and I went to law school together, actually up in Canada. This is what we do. We do business immigration a lot with physicians, health practitioners. So this is what we do, and I can certainly help you with anything you need in this regard. The presentation I have here, the slides, I've given a lot of these types of presentations in person to recruiters across the country. So I've modified it a little bit, but generally you may see some of it that may or may not apply to you. But it's been presented many times to recruiters, and over the years I've got a feeling for them of what's good about the process and what's not good about the process. And here are some typical concerns that recruiters have. You know, as somebody who's not been involved in immigration at all, one of the first issues is, are they qualified? Are they as good as American physicians? English skills are potentially an issue, because you may have when we're dealing with psychiatrists especially, you may have the technical English proficiency, but do you have the ability to communicate with people who are coming in the office and dealing with the physician? So that's a concern. And specialists, a lot of people have heard that you can only get foreign physicians in who are primary care. Well, in this case, if we're talking about doing J1 waivers, which I'll explain more in a little bit what those are, psychiatrists are considered primary care for these purposes. So they're not specialists for these purposes. And another issue to be aware of is whether or not you're in an underserved area, whether it's a medically underserved designated area or a health professional shortage area or a mental health professional shortage area. And that's real important. And Shoshana and I were just talking about that, saying it's, from my standpoint, you're going to need to be in that area probably to get a J1 waiver and to deal with foreign physicians. So you need to be proactive in finding out if you're in an underserved area, and if you're not, can you take steps to get your area designated as underserved? I personally haven't done that. I've had clients who have gone and done that. I don't know the process of that, but if anybody is interested in pursuing that, let me know and I can do some research and try to guide you on how to get the area designated as underserved, or at least apply to get it designated as underserved, because that's really important when we're dealing with foreign physicians. Okay. One of the reasons you need to look at foreign physicians is because there's just too many of them. You know, there's too many of them not to look at. If you're in need of physicians, foreign physicians are a really good option. Because of their immigration situation, a lot of them are willing to work in underserved area or less attractive areas than U.S. workers would look at, or U.S. physicians would look at. And the immigration process can actually serve as a retention tool, meaning you get them in and it could take 5, 6, 7 years or even longer to get a green card for some of these physicians, and that means you may have that physician for 5, 6, 7 years. When if you get somebody who's not tied to you from an immigration standpoint, they may come in and in 6 months they're gone and you're back to square one again. So it's not ideal for everybody, but it's something that I think recruiters need to at least consider to see if it's an option for you. Okay. Now, you're going to hear me talk about foreign physicians. And the different visa categories that they fall into. Now, generally, you're going to be dealing with foreign physicians who are here either on J1 visas or H1B visas. If you have a foreign physician who comes to you who has a green card, meaning permanent resident status, then you don't need me. You don't need a J1 waiver. You treat that physician as you would any U.S. worker. So basically, 99% of who you're going to be dealing with will be physicians who are here on J1 visas because they've come here to engage in a residency or training program, or an H1B visa, who have either got an H1B to do their residency or fellowship training program, or they're already at one employer working in H1B status and want to change to you. So those are the two types of visas generally you're going to be dealing with. The other visas are, if you happen to come across a physician who's one of the very best in the world, the O1 visa is another option. But generally, to keep it simple, you're either going to deal with a J1 visa holder who's coming right out of training, or an H1B who's either coming out of training or transferring from another employer. The J1 visa, and that's actually of the two options, the J1 and the H1. The J1 is really what you're going to be dealing with almost 80% of the time, because you're going to have a physician who's completing training, who's come here on a J1 visa. Once they've come to the United States on a J1 visa, the moment they step in the country, they are subject to what's called the 2-year home residence requirement, meaning they must go home, go back to their home country for 2 years once they've completed their training, unless they get a waiver of that requirement. So that's where the issue of the J1 waiver comes in. So a physician who comes here, who does their training, doesn't get a J1 waiver, he or she is going home for 2 years. Even if he or she marries a U.S. citizen, wouldn't matter. That J1 waiver requires they go home for 2 years, and then after that 2-year home residence requirement, they're able to come back on another visa, or if they've married an American, get their green card that way. So the only way around that for the physician, for the people you're going to be dealing with, is getting a J1 waiver. And a J1 waiver means that the physician is coming to work, in your case, in 3 years in an underserved area. So to recap, if you're dealing with a physician you're recruiting a physician who's on a J1 coming out of training, they can't change to any other type of visa or any other type of green card application until they either go home for 2 years, which wouldn't be a situation in your case because you probably wouldn't be dealing with them, or getting them a waiver. And there's J1 waivers are available, J1 visas are available to people from all different walks of life. Au pairs get them, camp counselors get them, research scientists get them. A whole bunch of different people will get J1s. J1s, in a lot of cases, you can get a waiver just by getting a letter saying, we don't need this person to come back to our home country. So if you're from Canada and you've come here as a camp counselor on a J1, they could get a waiver of no objection from the home country, or they might not even need a waiver to be able to stay here. All the waivers, if you're doing any research, all the waivers of no objection do not apply to physicians. Physicians must get a waiver from an interested government agency. For them to stay here, a physician coming out of training doesn't have any of the other options. If you're Googling how to get a waiver and you come up with all these other options, what you're going to be dealing with will be getting a waiver from an interested government agency, and in this case, it's going to be from the state. And the state of California is able to issue 30 waivers per year to physicians who are coming to work in underserved areas who are primary care. That's what it comes down to. We have 30 slots in California for primary care physicians, including psychiatrists, who are coming to work in underserved areas. And the California Department of Healthcare Services is the one who administers the J1 waiver program for California, and I deal with them a lot. It's amazing that 30, I always thought that 30 was nowhere near enough in a lot of the big states when this was first coming out. California generally fills up their slots, but sometimes it's gone almost 11 months before they filled those 30 slots. So there are slots available for people who want J1 waivers in California if you meet the criteria. Okay. The purpose of the J1 waiver is to expand the safety net to the medically underserved and the indigent in the state. That's what it's all about. It's not to come here and serve the people who are fully served already. It's to help the people in the areas that a lot of you are dealing with. And so the medically underserved areas, the health professional shortage areas, the mental health professional shortage areas. But there are some real issues with getting these waivers. And as we discussed in December when I was up there for a lot of you, there's an issue with it having to be full-time. The J1 waiver basic requirements means you have to commit to hiring the physician 3 years, working 40 hours per week in the shortage area, and as primary care. On this note, it says specialty medicine, depending on the program. In California, you must be primary care. So we're dealing with getting the application in immediately, as soon as possible, October 1, because that's when they open up the application. Then needing a commitment of 3 years, 40 hours per week to work for you. You must, as an employer, accept Medicare, Medicaid, indigent patients. You must, to qualify for the J1 waiver for the physician, document previous recruitment, showing you've made an effort to find U.S. workers. And it could take 4 or 5 months to get this waiver. So what happens is a physician will typically contact you, or you'll be dealing with them about a year in advance of when they're going to complete their training. So they complete June 30th of 2015. you're probably starting to deal with them now. So you have a physician who's interested in coming to you. We prepare the application. You want to get it in October 1. The application will take about 4 to 5 months to go through the process. So January, February, we have the waiver approval. And then at that point, the waiver, the physician doesn't work in waiver status. They get the waiver to then permit them to get an H-1B visa. A physician may say, I'm going to work in J-1 waiver. Well, you don't work in J-1 waiver. The waiver, again, is the waiver of the 2-year home residence requirement, and as a result, they're able to get an H-1B visa, which lets them work for you. The H-1B visa has other criteria. To get the H-1B visa for a physician, for anybody, but in this case for a physician who's got a waiver, you must pay the prevailing wage. The prevailing wage is the wage that is determined by the Department of Labor based on their studies of the area. So if the prevailing wage for a psychiatrist in your area is $160,000 a year, and you say, well, we can only pay $130 or $140, you might get the waiver because they may not know that they don't deal with prevailing wages very much when you're dealing with the waiver, but you would never get the H-1B and let them to work, to permit them to work. Because to get an H-1B visa, the employer must pay at least the prevailing wage as determined by the Department of Labor. So that's something that generally is not a problem because most people aren't going to come, most physicians aren't going to come work for you if you're paying below the norm or the prevailing wage, but it's an issue to be aware of. Once we get the H-1B visa, once we get the J-1 waiver, we apply for the H-1B visa, February, March-ish, with a start date of July 1, because we have to have a start date the day after their program ends, because they're on a J-1 visa till June 30th. Program ends, H-1B must start July 1 if they want to remain in the country. The H-1B visa is employer specific, meaning you get an H-1B visa for the physician. He then can't take that and go work somewhere else. You have him for 3 years with some minor exceptions. And the exceptions are that if a physician is experiencing extenuating circumstances beyond his control in the workplace, then he can change during that 3 years to another employer in an underserved area. Meaning, a classic example is a clinic closure. You sponsor a physician for a J-1 waiver, you get the J-1 waiver, start working, 6 months into it, there's no more money, clinic closes, physician is out of luck, he's not working. He then can change to another underserved area and work for the remaining 2.5 years in an underserved area and fulfill his J-1 waiver requirement. But he can't, the physician can't get a J-1 waiver, say in North Dakota, and come January say, yeah, it's a little too cold here, I don't like it, I want to change, I want to go to California. Those are not extenuating circumstances. That's just the way it is. They're not going to get a waiver. They're not going to get permission to change employers in that situation. Okay. Any questions at all about, Shoshana, are we okay? Because I've kind of gone through a whole bunch of stuff here.
Yeah, we're okay. We got a couple of comments that your sound, your audio is fading in and out, but I'm not quite sure what to do about that. So.
Okay, I'll try to speak a little louder if that helps.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Thanks.
So now we're talking about the H-1B visa. So the H-1B visa ultimately is what the physician has to be able to work in the United States. The H-1B visa, there's two types. There's a cap subject H-1B and a cap exempt H-1B. The cap subject H-1B is available, these are just not for physicians. An H-1B is available to anybody doing a job that requires a degree. And the there's only 65,000 H-1B visas available to people every year. So there's very few of them. This year, you apply April 1 for the available cap H-1Bs. This year, in 4 days, they got about 130,000 applications for the 65,000 that are out there. So if you're dealing with cap subject H-1Bs, you're going to have a problem getting physicians. You're going to have a problem getting employing people. Now, when somebody gets a J1 waiver, they're exempt from the cap. So I'm raising this just to alleviate some concerns when you read in the paper that there's no H-1Bs available, or there's somebody, your friend tells you that don't deal with immigration because there's no H-1Bs. They use them all up in a couple days. If you're dealing with a J1 waiver, that's not an issue, because the waiver applications are cap exempt. They don't have to get one of those 65,000 that are available every year. The flip side of that is, if you have a physician who's done training in H-1B status, they are cap exempt, and they must go to a cap exempt employer. Cap exempt employers are universities or not-for-profit agency entities that have an affiliation with the university. So most of you probably will not be a cap exempt employer. So red flag is, if you have a physician who did their training in H-1B status and you're looking at recruiting them, it might not work because they need to come to a cap exempt employer, and you're probably not a cap exempt employer. That being said, some of you might be if you're a not-for-profit that have an affiliation with a university. And that's something we should discuss if, one-on-one if need be. Okay? So J1 waiver applications are cap exempt. The 65,000 H-1Bs are not an issue because you don't have to deal with those. But if you're dealing with somebody who did training in H-1B status, that should be a red flag. Okay. We'll move on here.
Question.
Yeah.
What is the website for information about prevailing wage?
I can post that. It's a really long website. I think if you Google prevailing wage Department of Labor, it should come up. I'll see what I can come up with and shoot the email out to everybody, or send it to you. Maybe you could forward it on. What you find online is going to give you a good idea, but it's not binding. The prevailing wage determination online is just a general. It's a general amount. Normally it's pretty close, but the only thing that's binding for the prevailing wage is actually a request you have to make with the Department of Labor that takes around 60 days to get a response. So the problem with that is you've signed the physician, you're working towards all this, and it takes a long time to get the prevailing wage determination back. So we check online, we see if there's something kind of funky with the numbers. If it's 300,000 when you're looking at 160,000 per year. But the only way we really find out is doing a formal request with the Department of Labor. And the other issue online is they generally just list physicians. They don't list specialties or subspecialties. So you're not going to find online psychiatrists for prevailing wage. Okay. Now, so when you're dealing with a physician, they're going to come to you. They're going to hopefully, if you're in an underserved area, if you can hire them for their 40 hours a week, 3 years commitment working in the underserved area, you'll get them the J1 waiver, which permits them to get the H-1B, which permits them to work for you. Now, one of the issues that we might as well talk about it now, I know there are some questions about sharing of an employee for these purposes. I've talked to the state on that, and they don't mind. That's fine, except there's only going to be one sponsor. So if 3 of you want to share a psychiatrist who will work Monday, Tuesday at one location, Wednesday, Thursday at another, and Friday at another, that's fine, but one of you must step up to be the full-time employer. And one of you would be the sponsor for the J1 and the H1B, and as a result, you would have the other 2 locations listed as work sites for your employee. So you can't share an application for full-time employment when it wouldn't be. You would have the full-time employee working for you 2 days a week at your location, 2 days a week or whatever it is, 1 day a week at another, and 2 days a week at another. That's the way it could work for somebody who says we need to job share, for lack of a better term. Now, the other issue that came up was telemedicine, and it's been a hot topic for J1 waiver quite a bit. J1 waivers quite a bit over in a bunch of different states. And I had a long discussion with the state, Corinne Chavez, the health program manager there, and they've had long discussions about it, and they've decided they will not entertain J1 waiver applications based on telemedicine as of yet. They say there's too much demand for the J1 waivers the way they are, and they're not going to permit telemedicine right now. They understand the need for it. They're going to revisit it, they said, down the road. But right now, telemedicine cannot be a basis for a J1 waiver. I know that was a thing we talked about in December, and I thought I'd give you that update as well. So that's what you have with a physician who's then working for you. Once they come in, they're working for you, they get settled, July 1, they start working. July 3rd or so, they're going to come in and say, I want my green card. And that's kind of normal because the green card is permanent resident status, which gives the physician the ability to work wherever they want. And it's ultimately what somebody would want to be in the United States. And this, again, is somewhat of a retention option for you. Because if you say, no, I'm not going to do a green card for this physician, guaranteed at the end of 3 years, the physician is gone. Because he or she will go to a place that will sponsor them for a green card. They need to work their 3 years based on the J1 waiver, but then after that, they're probably gone. The way around that, or the way to help retain the physician, is to do a green card application. Now, there's pros and cons, but you can't complete the green card process until the 3 years are up. So if you start during that period, you can do the first 2 steps of the green card process, and then the last step, which is called adjustment of status, is filed after the 3 years are complete. It takes another 6 to 12 months to complete that. So in that situation, you have the physician for about 4 years. If the physician is from India or China, there's significant backlogs to be able to file that last step. And it's quite possible it could be another 3, 4, 5 years before you file that last step. Now, that's not saying the physician will stay with you that whole time, but there's a better chance of them staying with you if you started the green card process than if you haven't. And that's just from years of experience what I've seen. It really comes down to them saying, the physician saying, if you're not going to do a green card for me, I'm out of here after 3 years. Now, there's 2 different ways to do a green card, or actually 3 different ways to do a green card based on employment. The first one I'm going to talk about is a national interest waiver. And a national interest waiver is available to somebody who's willing to commit to working 5 years in an underserved area as a primary care or as a specialist. So you can have a physician who says, yeah, I'm interested in doing a national interest waiver. I'll sign a 5-year contract with you. And I think in your situations, in a lot of your situations, that's a really good recruitment tool. You say, we'll do the J1 waiver. If you commit to 5 years, we'll do a national interest waiver right off the bat for you. And you probably then have them for a good 5+ years. There's no guarantee. They can leave and start all over again at a new employer, but once you have them and you've shown that commitment to get them their green card, I think you lock them down for a fair amount of time, for most of that time. Now, they need that 5-year commitment, but 3 of those years can be the 3 years that are also working towards fulfilling the J1 waiver. So that's a good way to get a green card, and the beauty of the J1 or the national interest waiver is that it avoids the need to do what's called labor certification. So the second way to do a green card for a psychiatrist or for a physician, a foreign physician, would be to deal with the Department of Labor to prove there's no qualified U.S. workers willing and able to do the job. And that requires advertising, postings, literally an ad in the newspaper looking for a psychiatrist. It's going to be successful in your situation because there's clearly a shortage, and if you're dealing with somebody who actually has a J1 waiver, there's clearly a shortage of U.S. workers, but it's time-consuming and expensive. So it's more work than the national interest waiver, but it's quicker, meaning getting a green card based on labor certification, the physician will be done about 6 months after they complete their 3 years in the underserved area. Getting a green card based on the national interest waiver, the 5-year commitment, then they're finished about 6 to 12 months after their 5-year commitment. So you're adding another 2 years if you do a national interest waiver. So as I said, for the labor certification process, if you're doing a green card for them, you have to recruit. Then the Department of Labor approves the case, and then it goes on to immigration, which is the second step. You file the I-140 petition. When that's approved, there's nothing more that can be done until they've fulfilled their 3 years in the underserved area. And again, the reason I'm saying this is I know it's getting kind of deep into the immigration process, but if you're going to jump into this, you don't just do J1 waivers and H-1Bs, because all of this will come up in a conversation almost, the second time you meet. Are you willing to do a green card for me? Are you willing to pursue a national interest waiver or a labor certification? This is stuff that the foreign physicians that I deal with are very aware of what's required. And if you're going to go, you got to go big, I think, or I have some physicians or some employers or recruiters who say, no, I'm okay with the turnover every 3 years. So we get a physician, we have them come in for the 3 years. I don't know if we want to do a green card. Maybe in a special case we will, or we'll wait a couple years and see if they're really good. But I'm okay with having the turnover every 3 years of getting a J1 waiver in, knowing he's leaving after 3 years, getting a new one in, and having that sort of cycle. So it's clearly up to you, but if you're going to be going into the green card process, this is the stuff you need to know. And I'm going to skip through some of this, although when you're doing the green card process, again, the prevailing wage or the ability to pay the wage is always an issue. You have to show the ability to pay the wage being offered to the physician, and it can't undercut U.S. workers. You can't make a deal with somebody saying, I'll do your J1 waiver, I'll do your H-1B, I'll do your green card, but we're going to pay you 80% of what we'd normally pay as a result. You can't have that situation. The case would get denied.
Question.
Okay. Yes.
How do you know if you are an underserved area?
Well, there's listings of the underserved areas online, and again, I'll send a link for those. If you go to Google and you type HIPSA, HPSA, or MUA, or MHPSA, I'm sorry, Mental Health Professional Shortage Area, the first results that come up is a website that that will show a listing of how to find underserved areas. And then you type in your address, and it'll come up right away and tell you if you're underserved or not. And if you're underserved, fantastic, you can proceed with this. If you're not, then you would either, if you think you should be, then you'd have to pursue getting designated. Now, if you're dealing with J1 waivers in California for psychiatrists, you must be filing in a mental health professional shortage area. An MUA is not good enough. for national interest waivers, not to completely confuse the issue, but national interest waiver is the green card process. You don't have to be in a mental health professional shortage area for a national interest waiver, but you do for a J1 waiver.
Another question.
Okay.
What is the financial responsibility for the county mental health in hiring a J1 physician, including supporting the applicant for NIW or Leibl certification?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, you have to pay the prevailing wage, but in addition, there's fees that must be paid that can't be reimbursed by the physician. There's certain fees that have to be paid. When you're talking about the J1 waiver and the H1B, there's a $1,500 employer fee for the H1B that must be paid by the employer that can't be reimbursed by the employee. So that fee, there's no question, it has to be paid. There's a $500 fee that it's somewhat ambiguous if the employee can pay it or not. I always suggest the employee or the employer pay it, so there's no issue at all. There's not a perfect answer from immigration on who must pay that. Now the remaining fees, the base fee of $325 that has to be paid as well for filing fees, plus the legal fees, is kind of up in the air. Anybody can pay it, provided if the physician pays it, it doesn't drop him below the prevailing wage. Meaning, if he pays $5,000 in legal fees to get the J1 waiver and an H1B, and his effective wage then is $155,000 because he's getting $160, but minus the $5,000 he paid for legal fees, his effective wage is $155,000, and therefore he's below the prevailing wage. That can't be done. Any amount he pays will be subtracted by the actual wage he gets, and if that drops him below the prevailing wage, he can't pay it. But if he's making $200,000, the prevailing wage is $160, and he pays $5,000 in fees, that's okay. So that's the responsibility from a fee standpoint for the H-1B and the J-1 waiver. From the green card standpoint, anything to do with a labor certification application, the first step in one of the green card processes, the PERM that was up there, the employee cannot pay for. The employer must cover the legal fees required for the labor certification, the advertising costs, and that's it, because there's no government fee for a labor certification. The steps after that, dealing with the Immigration Service, filing the I-140 petition and the adjustment of status, can be paid by anybody. The national interest waiver fees, all the fees associated with that, can be paid by anybody. So, in essence, the labor certification process must be paid by the employer. The government fees for the H-1B must be paid by the employer, and the rest is dependent situation by situation. Okay. So I've put together some hypotheticals. I don't know if this is normally we do these in a group setting where we can feed off each other and ask questions and responses and so on. But these hypotheticals are really will really get your mind thinking of who's eligible for a J1 and a J1 waiver and an H1B and who's not, and all the different scenarios going back and forth with that. But I'm not sure, Shoshana, how you want to deal with this, but I can read through it and let you know what you think. Or Shoshana, what do you think?
Well, if we have time, please read through it and maybe explain what the answer is. Yeah,
okay. And is there any more questions about what we've covered? Because I've gone through that pretty fast, but.
Please ask Jeff to summarize the cost analysis when he sends his information later.
The cost analysis? I mean, how much it would cost, or how much they specifically need to pay? Because from a cost standpoint, if you're looking at a J1 waiver, legal fees are generally $5,000 what we charge. The J1 waiver and the H1B, the legal fees are $5,000. On top of that, you're going to have another around $3,000 in government fees. So to get the physician working for you and secured for that 3-year period, it's around $8,000. Legal fees of $5,000, government fees of $3,000. Then when you're talking about a green card process, it's going to be anywhere between $8,000 and $9,000 in legal fees and government fees, depending on how many family members and so on. You're looking at another $3,000 or $4,000. So if you're looking at doing a green card, a J1 waiver, an H1B, and a green card, $20,000 is a real good estimate. Every situation is different. If they're single, if they have 6 kids, you know, so there's some differences there. But that's a real good estimate, and that's where you say, is it worth spending that money to do this, to jump into the immigration process? And what I suggest always is, if you have a physician that you're interested in, before you bring them in for a site visit or before you go too deep, get them on the phone with me, or first of all, you and I could we could speak, and if you want, get the 3 of us on the phone, and we could see if there's even an option. Because there's many times I get on the phone with a recruiter and we hang up, and I talk to the recruiter after and say it's not worth it. It's just not, you know, for whatever reason, it's not worth pursuing that option. And then there's other ones where you say, well, this is an easy one because we could do the J1 waiver and the H1B, and because she's married to an American, when she's done her 3 years, she gets her green card based on that marriage. You don't even have to do a green card for her. So every case is different, and I really encourage you to do that one-on-one consultation with me. I don't charge for it. I'll give you a flat fee quote when we're done of what it would cost if we pursue it. And I think it's, you know, I've done it for many, many years, and I think it's a real good use of time, and to zero in on who's good and who you don't want to deal with, just from a practical standpoint. So this hypothetical. The Beverly Hills Hospital, a for-profit facility, is seeking an orthopedic surgeon. It is not in a medically underserved area and can probably find an American doctor, but really wants Dr. Dudley Mulroney, a physician from Canada who's been working for the last 18 months in Toronto after completing a highly prestigious fellowship on a J1 visa in Boston. Dr. Mulroney is widely regarded as one of the more talented surgeons in the field. Beverly Hills Hospital is also interested in employing Dr. Mulroney's wife, Celine, an RN who used to work in Boston when Dudley was in the fellowship program. Dr. Mulroney never took the USMLE 3 before leaving the U.S., but did take the Canadian exams. Okay, there's a whole bunch of issues here, and some that we didn't talk about. But one thing I want to mention is physicians to get H-1B visas must have their USMLEs Parts 1, 2, and 3. There's virtually no exception to that. There's one very minor one. You have to be a physician of international renown. You have to be one of the best in the world to get a waiver of the USMLEs. But for the physicians you're going to be dealing with, if for some reason they don't have USMLEs 1, 2, and 3, don't even worry about them. Go to the next one. Now, in almost all cases I've ever seen, the only ones who don't have USMLEs are Canadians, because Canadians take their LMCC exam. So in this situation, I would advise the hospital to say, wait to wait 6 more months, because Dr. Mulroney has already spent 18 months in Toronto. All he has to do is spend 6 more months in Toronto, and then you don't have to deal with getting a J1 waiver. You have to get Dr. Mulroney a work visa, an H-1B or an O-1 visa, somebody of extraordinary ability, but you don't have to deal with the waiver if he's been out of the country for 24 months. His wife being a nurse is helpful in some cases, because nurses have priority under immigration law to get their green cards in certain situations. And if we can get a green card for her, he gets one as well, and we solve the problem of having to get him an H-1B or an O-1 visa. Beware of those Canadians, though. So this analysis is, we looked at the non-immigrant visas for Dr. Moroney, the H-1B. Again, Canadians generally, if they don't do their training down here, or they only do some of their training down here, they don't always do USMLEs, because Canadians can get licensed in most states, and I think in California as well, you can get licensed without having your USMLEs based on their LMCCs up in Canada. So if you have a Canadian doc that you're looking at, make sure they have their USMLEs. Okay. This next option, more applicable, I think, in your case. Dr. Shaw has approached you because he is very unhappy at his current employer in South Dakota. The employer is making him work ridiculous hours, is not respectful, and is paying him considerably less than was promised in the contract Dr. Shaw signed as part of his J1 waiver, which he got through the South Dakota State waiver program. You have found a nice place for him, but Dr. Shaw still has 2 years left of his 3-year work obligation in South Dakota. Can he switch employers? The answer is yes. And you may have a scenario like this come up. There's many, many physicians who get J1 waivers who aren't happy where they're at. So they may come to you and say, hey, can I come work for you in your underserved area? And I don't know how a lot of people recruit, but I would actually almost consider putting an ad in one of the journals saying, we'll entertain J1 waiver transfers, because there's going to be people sitting out there who are unhappy with their position. They're in South Dakota, they're in New Hampshire, they're in Texas, wherever it is. They're not being treated well. They need to go to another underserved area to fulfill their J1 waiver commitment, but you don't have to get another J1 waiver. So you don't have to deal with the state getting a waiver. If you're in this case, an MUA or a HIPSA, it doesn't even have to be in a mental health professional shortage area because of the transfer, you could bring that person over. So Dr. Shaw needs to prove extenuating circumstances, and extenuating circumstances are clinic closure, not getting paid enough, being told to work more hours than was in the contract, workplace harassment. Situations like that, extenuating circumstances arise under many situations. We've done a number of them over the years, and I'm surprised to say that none have ever been denied, and we've had some pretty weak ones. When somebody says, at least apply, see if we can get this approved, and it was pretty flimsy evidence to show extenuating circumstances, and I think immigration doesn't have a very rigid policy on when this gets approved. As long as the person is going to work in another underserved area, I've seen them get approved. So something to be aware of. And, oh, that's the last hypothetical. So to sum up, it's not as complicated as it sounds, and I can really make it simple for you once you get your physician that you're somewhat interested in. We can really zero in on it. Timing is important if you're doing J1 waivers. Right now is not a time to apply for J1 waiver. October 1 in California, you want to file for the J1 in the fall. October, November, December, January is getting tight. A lot of times over the years, January, that's when the J1 allotment has been filled in California. If you're going to do it, I would say now's the time to get that physician signed, get the application in October, and you're looking at a start date of July 1 of 2015. That's the sort of timetable you're looking at as the years go on. Any questions?
Here's a question. Any way to find out the status of the number of J1 waiver slots available for a state?
Yes, they online. The state of California has a running total. And it's not completely up to date, but it's always very close within a few weeks. So you'll know, they'll say 17 issued. I think they even have pending in there. Every state's a little different, but you'll know. And we can always just call and get an update as well. So online generally.
Okay, and then there's a request that when you send information by email, you summarize which fees the agency versus the physician need to pay.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So you want the information on how to find the HIPSA and MUAs, and the website for tracking the numbers in California, and then and the prevailing wage determination. Now keep in mind, again, I'm going to send you that prevailing wage determination link, but it should just be give you a general idea. You cannot rely on that for H-1B purposes.
Another question, what are the chances of J-1 waiver being denied, and what is the most common reason?
The chances of being denied, I think, are not great. I think there's more a chance of not getting it because you're cutting it too close and you were number 31 in submission. Yours didn't get there before the last one got there, that sort of thing. I would never submit one that's not going to be clearly eligible. It's not that complicated from the standpoint of the contract must require full-time employment, 3 years in the underserved area. Has to be primary care or as including psychiatry. You have to show some recruitment efforts, but it's not that complicated. The hardest part is finding the doc, finding the physician who's going to apply. I rarely see them get denied, if ever, I think. You can't, I guess the biggest issue would be maybe in the contract. If you put something in, if your general contract has too many restrictions, obviously you can't have non-compete clauses. But there's generally not a reason that if you're submitting it, it should be getting approved, as long as there's a number available. Okay.
Will you provide the website for determining how many slots in California are still available?
Yeah, I'll include that. I'll shoot you an email, and then you can, you guys can just click on it. Right now, there's none available because we're in August, but as of October 1, they'll have the 30 available again, and they'll have a countdown from there. So if that is that all the questions?
Yeah, at this point.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to entertain any calls or emails if you have them. You can. My contact information's up on the screen. Also, if you need to see me in person, absolutely. I enjoyed coming up to visit with you in Sacramento last year, and I'd do it again this year if you need me, or if another webinar is the way to go. I'm up for it. So I'd love to help you out, and I really appreciate the invitation to do this for you. I hope it was helpful. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. It was very helpful. Very appreciated.
Oh, my pleasure. Take care. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.